Hi, welcome. I'm so happy that we have folks here. I was a little fearful that we were going to be speaking to a room full of empty chairs, so I'm really happy to see you all. My name is Allison Peacock. I am Director of Product for the Luna portal, and I'm here today with, I'll show you some friendly faces, with David Makovsky, who's the architect on the Luna team, and Bhagirath and Siley, who are in our services organization. And today we're going to talk a little bit about some of our self-service tools. So we've got a lot of content to cover. And the first topic we're going to talk about is the Onboard and Configuration Assistant. And that is our new self-service onboarding tool. And David's going to take you through a demo of that. We also have that demo out in the dev zone in the kiosks. I'm going to ask if there are questions that we save them to the end, just so we can get through all of the content. And David will be around after as well to answer any additional questions or specific questions that you may have about your own experiences. And then Siley and Bhagirath are going to talk about default templates, which is a feature in Property Manager. Typically, it is something that our professional services organization uses, but it is available to you, and so they'll take you through the details of that and how you can make changes on your own using that tool. So, with that, let's get started. So, as I said, Onboard and Configuration Assistant, or OCA, as we like to call it, is a new tool that we introduced a couple months ago. It is available for the web performance product line. And it's a simple way to get a customized configuration up and running on the network. So this was really brought upon in response to customer feedback, where we heard that it takes a lot of people and a lot of time to often get services up and running here at Akamai. So we built this tool with a specific user in mind, that user being someone who may not have graduated from our wonderful Akamai University or have a lot of experience with us here at Edge. So something that was guided, a workflow that really broke down all of the complexities into 4 simple steps to get through the onboarding. So we're going to show you that tool today. And then also talk about our best practices recommendation engine that is also a part of this tool. So David's going to come up and show you what that looks like.
Thank you, Allison. All right, so the first thing that I want to show you is OCA is available now. I want to show you how you can get to it. As Allison said, it's available for the web performance products today. And so that means Ion Premier, Ion Standard, Ion Advanced Media, Dynamic Site Accelerator, Dynamic Site Delivery, and Rich Media Accelerator. So if you have any of those products, you can go in and use this tool today. The way you invoke it, there's 2 different ways. So if you go into the property group landing page, which you see here, which you get to by clicking on the little blue chevron bar up on the top there, you can see there is a button right there, which is the new default, which says Create New OCA Property. That's normally where the Create New Property Manager button used to be. It's actually, you can't see it on the screen, but it's a split button, so you can choose between the 2 applications. The second way to invoke it is if you go into the Configure menu in Luna and you select a new property. It takes you to this page, and there's a drop down there. The default is still Property Manager, but if you pull that drop down, you can see that there is an option to choose OCA. And again, if you have any of those products I mentioned, this is available to you today. All right, I'm going to go to a demo right now. And so first, a quick note about why this is a canned demo. So what OCA does is it provides guide rails to make sure that you can get through the entire process end to end of onboarding a property and not do anything wrong. And in doing that, it actually checks a lot of things. So if I actually was doing this live, it would actually be verifying my origin and my DNS and my SSL certificate and all these other things, which is a little cumbersome to do in a demo. So we basically have a canned demo so that we don't have to do those pieces, and I can show you how it works. So as you know, we have Property Manager today and a bunch of other tools in the portal. You've seen what the menu looks like and all the things that we have. But it requires it's extremely powerful, but it requires a certain level of knowledge about Akamai and CDNs and configuration to really be effective using it. And the goal here was to sort of take away that requirement that you have all this upfront knowledge and guide you through the entire process. So let me jump to the demo. All right, so this is the onboarding configuration assistant. And so we had a basic philosophy with this, and that is that we're not going to ask you any questions that we can ascertain on our own. And so if there's things that we need to ask you, we will ask you, and if we don't, we will not. So you can see here you have to choose your product and your contract. If you only have one product, you only have one contract, we're not going to ask you these things. We ask you what domain you want to onboard. Simply select the domain you want to onboard, and then we ask you a couple of business questions. So first we ask, what type of user experience do you have on this site? Is it primarily a website? Is it primarily a mobile application, an API? Is it static assets? And based on this, it's going to inform what the basic default configuration looks like. So you simply select it. We ask a few other questions. Do you have any PCI compliance requirements? Are you handling credit card data? Do you have personally identifiable information on your site? If you select any of these things, we're going to force you to use our secure network and go over SSL. And again, so it's all about sort of guide rails and making sure everything is set up correctly. At this point, what we actually do is we do a light scan of the origin site that you've given us. It basically goes for about 2 minutes. We do things like we check your origin SSL certificate, we make some HTTP requests, we look at the headers, we look for things that might inform the configuration, like the vary headers. And again, this is all going to inform what we do for the base configuration. Then you're on to step 2, which is actually the configuration settings. And in the interest of trying to keep this as lean as possible, we focus just on the 2 things that you minimally have to do to get up and running. And that is set up your origin host and set up your SSL certificates. And so we give you an origin DNS entry that we need you to create, so we know where to get to your origin when you go live. We give you a default one that has a random hash in it. If you don't like it, you can change it. And then we actually do a DNS lookup and we verify that you've created it correctly. For the SSL certificates, this is if you're doing a secure configuration, which in this case we are. We verify your origin certificate. So we use OpenSSL and we go out, we look at your origin certificate. We make sure that it meets the requirements, and the things we'll check that it's there and accessible. We'll check that the domain matches what you're trying to configure. We'll check that it's a valid certificate authority. We'll check that the certificate is not expired. If all those checks pass, then we set up the Edge certificate on the Akamai network. And at this point in Property Manager, you typically have to go out of Property Manager and you'd have to go into a separate tool and go through a whole request process. We tried to make it easier here. We've put all of the SSL request components in line. So you can just go in here, and if you want an OV or a DV SSL certificate, you can request it directly in line. So if you want an OV, you just fill out the information here and hit submit, and that gets sent off to Symantec for validation. That typically takes about 2 business days. And so one of the other aspects of this whole application is that it will allow you to pick up where you left off, right? So at any time, if you hop out of this and come back in, it'll take you right back to the step you left off on. If you want to request a DV cert, for those of you who are familiar how that works, you have to answer some challenges on your website in order to get the DV certificate issued. The challenges will actually, you fill out the form and submit it. The challenges come back right away. Right in line. They tell you what the challenges are. You implement them on your website, and we'll actually look up the challenges in line as well and verify that they're correct and issue your certificate. If you have a certificate already on Akamai that you want to use, say you have a wildcard one, we also give you the ability to search for any existing certificates and simply select them. So at this point, that is literally all the configuration steps you have to do to start testing this and move to the go live step. However, there are a lot more settings under the hood, right, obviously. So we focused on the to-do items, but you see there's a drop-down here. You can switch to all settings, and you see all the settings that we've done in this configuration. Now, this is extremely streamlined and simplified from what you see in Property Manager. First of all, everything is categorized according to what type of setting it is. So we have security, performance, intelligence, site availability, server offload, etc. The settings themselves are very simplified. In Property Manager, there's a lot of different settings and a lot of tweaks you can do. We've tried to use intelligent defaults for all of these. Most of these settings are very simple, just on-off. Even the caching, which is the only one that's a little bit more sophisticated, is fairly simple. So if you look at the caching rules, essentially it's don't cache anything except, or cache everything except, and then list out your exceptions. The exceptions are very basic. It's based on file extension and path matches, which you can just very simply add right in line. And there you've added a path match for anything in /static to cache for 2 days. And it'll accept wildcards as well. So it's a much more simplified interface. So once you're, and again, you don't have to look at all these settings at this point based on the business questions that we've asked you, plus the site scan that we've done. We've come up with what we believe is a very good configuration for you right out of the gate. So if you want to go in and see the settings and tweak them, you can do that, but you don't have to. You literally can just set up the origin DNS and set up your SSL certificates and go. So at that point, you go to the preview and test stage. So at this point, we push the configuration out to the network. This is not actually going live. It's just getting the configuration out. And then we take you through the testing step. And so, in the past, everyone, all of our applications just sort of assume that you know all the steps to go through and how to test and how to do these things. And we try to walk you through a little bit more in detail. And so, first of all, we create just a link to test if your site loads with Akamai. So you see there's a link here for the site I'm adding. It'll actually go to the Akamai equivalent domain. So if you click on this, it would go to www.example.com.edgekey.net. And it would actually load that configuration, pull from your origin, and you could see if the page loads. But if you want to do more sophisticated functional testing, you probably need to spoof your local computer to point to an Akamai server. And so we give you detailed instructions for that. And we literally give you the Akamai IP address to point to and your host name. You can grab this and cut and paste it and stick it in your Etsy host file, and you're set to test. One other thing I want to call out here. The way we would design this, on the right-hand side, you see this sort of gray bar, and there's sort of inline help here. We spent hundreds and hundreds of hours making sure that this help is very comprehensive. I can't actually click through it in the demo, but there is a lot of help text behind there. So if any of this is confusing as you go through, there's a lot of support and a lot more information available. When you're done with this, you can actually continue to the go live step. And the go live step essentially is just telling you the final DNS change you need to actually go live. And so we tell you, here's your domain, here's the DNS entry you need to make, here's the recommended TTL for it, and then we'll actually verify that you've done it correctly. So once you actually make the change, we will actually you can press a button and we'll give you a little green check mark to confirm that you've done it correctly. All right, so then when you're done with that, you get a property landing page, very similar to Property Manager. We've walked you through the entire step, beginning to end. We've tested every step along the way. We've tested your DNS entries, your SSL certificates, made sure that everything is correct. We've given you a good default configuration based on what we've seen on your site and the information that you've answered for us. You can continue to edit in this application. You can use this simplified interface to edit on an ongoing basis. But if at any time the subset of functionality that's available here is not sufficient for you and you need more advanced, there is a Convert to Property Manager button right here. So you click that, it takes the entire thing, imports it into Property Manager, and now you have all of the settings that you would normally have in Property Manager available, but you've gone through basically an easy onboarding step to get up and running. So one last component to this is the recommendation engine. So in addition to making it easy to get onboarded, we wanted to make sure that you could stay optimized over time. So things change over time, configurations get out of date, things aren't as effective anymore. Every 2 weeks after you go live, we send you an email, and this email has recommendations for you. We look at your configuration and we look at your traffic, and we'll tell you if you have Akamai services that you've already purchased but you haven't turned on. We'll tell you if any of the configuration settings have fallen into misconfiguration. So for example, if for our SureRoute feature, we require you keep a test object on your origin. If that object has been deleted, we will inform you that that's happened so you can correct it. And in addition, we'll scan your traffic and we will give you a list of the top URLs by volume that have either no caching or low cacheability. So you can sort of evaluate that and see if you're missing any opportunities to increase your cacheability. And so this is really a core piece that we've added here to try to make sure that from a self-service perspective, you can keep everything up to date. All right, that is the end of the presentation on OCA. I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleagues in GSS to talk to you about Property Manager and ways to take self-service control of that.
All right. So before I actually get started, how many of you have used Property Manager? OK, perfect. And how many of you have used default templates in Property Manager or have heard of it? OK, awesome. So just to sort of give an overview, Property Manager, like everyone knows in the room, is a one-stop shop for configuring basically managing your websites. And just to make it even more self-serviceable, we have something called as user templates and default templates. In this particular section, we're going to focus specifically on the default templates, but there was another section, rather presentation that happened on the user templates, which will be posted to the community in a few days. So what are default templates really? Like David mentioned, that to sort of onboard your site, we can use the OCA tool, but if you want to go one step further and configure something that's more complex or advanced, which in most cases you would have to, you have to use Property Manager. And to make that even more simpler, we have something called as default templates. Now, we have a range of these default templates, as you can see, but today we're going to focus specifically on these different categories, which is caching, forwarding templates, protection, redirect, and site failover. We chose these because, based on our experience, a lot of customers use these particular default templates. All right, so the first one is caching based on browser locale. Now, I'm sure a lot of you serve content based on multiple, preferences that come from the end users. For instance, something like an accept language header, which indicates the language preference of that particular user. In that case, the flow would look something like this, where a request would be made for a particular page. At the Akamai layer, we would detect what's the value of this accept language header, and then based on that, fetch that particular page from the origin based on whichever language it is. Like for instance, if it was English, the ENUS, it will get the English version, versus if it was FR, then it would get the French version, and so on and so forth. Now, this is, I mean, it looks really simple, but when you actually want to implement it in Property Manager, there are a bunch of things that you have to take into consideration. And it's really easy to miss out on really simple things, which is why we have a specific template just for this. I'm not sure if it's visible, the text which is in there, but all we need to really focus on here is those behaviors which get added when you add the template. The template is literally a one-click in Property Manager, and all it's doing is it says that if the path matches on, and you have to match on whichever path you're trying to apply this rule to, it adds these bunch of behaviors on its own. The first one is pretty obvious, the caching, because we're trying to cache that particular dynamic page for whatever duration of time. The default is 1 day, but again, that is customizable by you. Then we have something called the cache ID modification, where we are including the query strings as a part of the cache key, because we want those different pages with different query strings being cached differently. Then we also have another cache ID modification for including the accept language header, because your pages are now going to be segregated based on the value of the accept language. So any user coming in with the language preference of English, you're going to serve the page out of cache with the accept language EN. And same thing goes for French, and same thing goes for any other language that you might have.
So essentially what the template is allowing you to do is not miss something big, right? For example, if you tried doing this yourself and forgot to include the accept language cookie or header into your cache key, then all these pages are not going to be cached separately. They may have the same cache key. So a French user might get a Japanese page or so on, right? Like depending on where they get matched. So with the template, you're essentially eliminating these possibilities just so that it's all part of one single workflow, so you don't miss it.
Right, and the good part is that these are just to be seen as building blocks, and obviously you can either edit it, you can add more behaviors. For instance, I know a lot of my customers, they want to track the performance for dynamic pages separately, so you can actually add a behavior with CP code so that that particular ID can be used for monitoring the performance on that particular page to see maybe how much offload you're getting or how many end users are actually hitting that page and so on. Another behavior that gets added is the downstream cacheability, something that's really easy to miss when you actually think about caching. Mainly when you're making changes on Akamai, you only think about how long you want to cache it on the Akamai servers, but very rarely would you actually also think that, oh, these dynamic pages can be cached for some time on the clients too. So it automatically adds downstream cacheability where it will send the cache control headers downstream so that it's cached for a particular time frame and that request never comes to the edge, thus helping with performance. Any questions so far for this particular one before I move on to the next? Okay. PII, personally identifiable information. Can anyone in the room like sort of tell us what PII is? Like, what does it actually mean?
Or throw out examples.
Yeah.
Right?
Name, address, social security, exactly. So, and it's pretty obvious that any information that belongs to this belongs to this individual and is maintained by an agency is what constitutes PII. Now, this could be direct information of that particular individual, something like you mentioned the SSN or the passport number or the driver license, or it could be, you know, like educational records, medical records, or employment information. And this is very sensitive data, and you don't want this to, you know, be exposed to other people. This is really important because any breach of PII is not just risky for that particular individual, but also the organization that the breach has happened to. It just causes loss of trust, and as you saw in the recent times, this happened with a very big financial institution, and it has really dire consequences. So we want to make sure that you give a prime importance to PII and protecting the PII content that is on your sites. For this, we have another template which is called PII in Property Manager. What it does is, and again, the criteria is the path or the directories that you think contains PII information. Now, mostly this would be something like the order confirmation pages when somebody checks out, or it could be bank statements, or it could be query strings or cookies which contain the user ID information. All this is PII, and you want to make sure that you don't end up caching this either on the Akamai servers or downstream on your clients.
I just want to point out one thing. We've used path as a default example. It doesn't necessarily have to be path. It can be anything that comes in with the request. So it could be a cookie, it could be a header, it could be anything that identifies that particular page or that particular set of data. The moment we get that, we're able to identify this as PII information, then we can apply all of these other cache busting behaviors to it. So it doesn't really have to be path, it can be other things as well. Once you use this template in Property Manager, if you notice, these are all drop-down buttons, right, lists, and the moment you click it, anything that applies to it will show up.
Right, so...
Wait, there's a question there.
Oh, sorry.
Correct.
It does, and we're going to go next into what happens if there's another one that overrides the setting. You'll see a warning, which is what I'll talk about. So initially, if you just match on whichever directories might have PII information, it marks that content as PII. It makes sure that it's a no store on the Akamai server so that we are not caching it. At the same time, we send cache busting headers downstream so that no other client is caching it. And in the log request detail, like I said, cookies could be holding very sensitive information. We make sure that we don't log any cookies. So this is all that it does. And to answer your question, if you do end up adding another rule below this, which makes something cacheable, then it will actually throw a warning messages like these, where it says that you're potentially caching content, and then it will also give you a recommended approach on which setting should you change so that it doesn't happen. It's really important, and I think it's a very useful template that you can use. The next one is remove debug info, but before I get into that, how many of you are familiar with Pragma headers that we have in Amazon? Okay, most of you. So as you know, Pragma headers is something that we send in a request so that we get debugging information in the response, which looks something like this. So as you can see, this really gives you a good amount of information about like which origin is the request going to, which edge server did it hit, which parent server did it hit, was it served by, from the cache, or was it not served from the cache? Now, while this might be really useful information, it could also be misused by someone. Like you're literally giving out your origin server host name, which somebody can use to DOS and just launch an attack against it. Now, so what's the solution to this? So for this, we have a template called as remove debug info, where we are essentially just removing this Pragma header, stripping it off right in the request, so none of these headers actually come in the response. But then what if you want to debug? So which is why there is an AND condition there where it says request header x-Akamai debug is not one of true. That means if you send x-Akamai debug with the value true, you will see the response headers, but it will only be for that particular end user. The rest of the people are not going to see it.
The x-Akamai debug is an example. It doesn't have to be that.
Right.
It's configurable so that you can put some unique identifier and unique string that people don't know about, so that only you or your team can use it to test. We recommend not using x-Akamai debug because a lot of people know about that. Also, we recommend not having your origin host names as origin blank blah blah blah, because people hackers know this already. You don't want them attacking your origin directly. So you want to mask that with some sort of a unique identifier.
Right, and like Bhagirath mentioned, the header name does not really have to be x-Akamai debug, but more importantly, the value can be something more complex. Like instead of just saying true, you could have like a unique, some hashed kind of a value that only you know about and your team knows about, so that you can test using Pragma headers. And moving on to Bhagirath. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Hailey. There's many different ways to do redirect based on location, right? You could have a top-level site that's, something like akamai.cn. You could have a path that goes from akamai-country/cn. It could be different. We use China as an example because it was easy to really pull together and say it's really different languages, right? There's easy ways to set this up with a template, and those templates look something like this. Again, the whole, I'm not going to go through all of this because you've heard her talk about them, you've seen what it's all about. Again, the idea is not that you can't do this without the template. The idea is more that the template is giving you some sort of a safety net by making sure all of the behaviors are added in line, so that it's behavior, right? You see it, you have to fill that out. It's just right there. So that's the whole idea there. There's other types of redirects that you could do. You might want to do a HTTPS redirect on a top-level domain. So if someone comes to you on HTTP, just want to force them to use HTTPS. So, sorry, that would be a permanent redirect on a 301, right? To do that, it's fairly straightforward again. You just change the protocol, and the request will be resent by the browser. And we can do this at the edge so that you don't have to have the end user come all the way to your origin to have this logic. That's another benefit of doing that. Or you could want to, if you have your top level domain being served out of our DNS product, then you could do a top level redirect as well. So as an example, if someone hits akamai.com, typically those are not on the CDN because you have your mail, you have internal sites on those, so you don't expose the top level domain out to a CDN generally. But if Akamai is your DNS provider as well, and you have your fast DNS or eDNS product, then what you could do is at the DNS level tell us to do this redirect for you. So even if someone hits your top level domain, they're forced to go to one that's on the CDN so that your origin doesn't take all these hits. It's fairly easy to launch a DDoS attack by attacking your DNS. So that's what this particular template's allowing you to work for, right? You just send them all over to wherever your highest scale is, right? But again, the caveat here is that you have to have the DNS being done by Akamai. That's the only way we could do this. The failover run is a very simple use case. A lot of the times we have these error pages which, a bad user experience for the end user. And you want something like this, right? You want something that gives them some information, it tells them what's happening, and it's just friendlier. Doing this is super simple. You could just use Akamai's net storage, which most of you should have access to already. You have some amount of storage space with Akamai, irrespective of which product you are using. So what you could do is just put the static page onto that net storage location, and then just use that location as the failover page. The moment we detect any sort of a timeout or a response code from the origin that is an error, we'll just use the page that we have so that even in the case of your origin actually being down, the end user doesn't really figure that out. They'll think that there's maintenance going on or whatever you want to tell them, right? So that's essentially brings us to the end of what we had as a presentation. But since we're a cozy group, we just want to open it up to other questions you may have or any other questions you had from the beginning of this presentation on OCA or learning engine or recommendation engine. Any of those things we can, feel free to ask. Yes, sir.
So under failover, does it require me to get the error codes?
I'm sorry?
For the failover,
Yeah.
all the error codes like the 502,
Yeah.
does it require me to go to use the metadata or getting the offline error codes passed to the next page?
No. You want to pass the error code to the end user, is that what you're trying to say?
Yes.
We could add that. That would be
That would
some.
be a separate behavior. You would
Yeah.
just have to override the status code. Let's say you want to, this would by default give you a 200 because you're just serving a page from NS. But you could add a behavior saying you want to override the status code to 503. So that's possible. Yes, you can
Yes.
do that by yourself. There's behavior for that.
Are all these templates re-entrant, meaning if I've got properties, settings that have we've been running with for years, can I just still pull them into these?
When you say pull them into these, are you talking about having some advanced metadata that's doing some of this stuff that you want to reuse?
Just using the templates.
Uh-huh.
Are those accessible to properties that have been set?
Yes. Yes, they are.
Oh yeah, this is available
Yeah.
for anybody who's on Property Manager. So all the templates should be.
No. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Someone had a question there. Sorry.
Back to the OCA. If you use the recommendation engine, you convert it to property manager?
Yeah. So the question there was in OCA, if you onboard with OCA and you get the recommendation engine, then when you convert to Property Manager, do you lose the recommendations? Unfortunately, now you do. One thing we're looking at is expanding the recommendation engine in general to Property Manager. So we'll look for that in the future, but right now, yes, you would.
And then if you introduce a new
Yes, as long as that's a feature that we've decided to add to the subset of features that is in OCA, then yes, you would actually, if we add a new feature to OCA and you have an older property, the recommendation engine would call out like, hey, you have this feature now available and you haven't turned it on. Yeah.
One more, in the API, is the OCA representation, does it look the same as the property manager? Is it flag to associate or something?
Right. Yes. So really, the OCA is a sort of a new sort of orchestration engine on top of Property Manager, and so in reality, it's actually using PAPI, the same Property Manager API that's available to everyone, under the hood to create a Property Manager config. So when you're doing the convert to Property Manager, you're really just flipping a flag saying that the user experience is changing. Okay, good question. The question was, what do you use for the cache key? Whether it's the origin hostname or the incoming hostname. I actually do not remember that off the top of my head, but I can find out that information for you and let you know. So if you, I'll be around after. I can grab that information for you.
I think you had a question. Okay.
Oh, I want to just add one thing really quickly. I know we had this in our synopsis about custom behaviors. It's been covered in a lot of other sessions. We kind of cut it for time, but it was still in the synopsis. So if anyone was here to hear about custom behaviors, I just want to touch on it for 2 minutes. If you have this particular problem that this solves, you probably know it very well. The problem is if you have, Property Manager is very powerful, has lots of things it can do, but it can't do 100% of all the functionality. And if it can't do what you need advanced metadata. Advanced metadata is only editable by professional services. And so if you have a standard block of advanced metadata that you use in all your configs, every time you create a new config, you have to rely on professional services to insert that piece for you, which is rather annoying, right? Because you've used it many times before. So we finally solved that issue. We've created something called a custom behavior, and basically you get that snippet of metadata pre-approved by professional services, and then it will just appear as a new customized behavior in your list of Property Manager behaviors, and you can just drag it into anything you want. This is in beta now. We have about 10 customers using it. It'll be available to all customers within a month or so. But if you have that situation and it's very painful, talk to your account team about trying to get access as soon as you can.
And one other thing with user templates, just like you had all these default templates, maybe sometimes you have certain rules that you add to every single configuration of yours. So you could bunch it up into a template and then reuse it as well across your other configurations. So that's what user templates allows you to do, but there's a lot more there that I'm not talking about, but just wanted to give you that as well.
Any other questions?
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.